Very welcome to the 23rd episode of the Urban Landschap series. Here we gather research and investment stakeholders in and around the DUT program that we think should eat lunch together and synthesize their evidence-based knowledge. I'm Jennifer, and I work with communications for the Driving Urban Transitions Partnership. And I have the pleasure of hosting this webinar today for my very first time. I also have my colleagues Ida and Kaisa from IQS backstage supporting with the technical parts and the chat. I hope you're all having a very nice lunch wherever you are. Please let us know in the chat where you're joining from. It will be very interesting to hear where you're having your lunch today. Also, during this lunch talk, remember, keep sharing your comments, ideas, and questions in the chat. We will take these up and answer them towards the end. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, and it will be later published on the Driving Urban Transitions Partnerships YouTube channel. I really want to highlight that these formats of the talks, we try to format them so that you don't have to look at the screen. So perhaps you want to take a walk while listening or just look out the window for a little screen break. Feel free, but of course you're very welcome to interact with the chat. But today's Urban Landschap then, it falls under the theme Urban Transitions in Times of Crisis. And in an era defined by rapid change and unforeseen crisis, the dynamics of our urban landscapes are constantly evolving, from the global pandemic that has reshaped the way we both live and work, to the environmental challenges demanding sustainable solutions. Our cities are at the forefront of transformation. And it's how we navigate through these crises and reimagine our urban environments that will shape the future of our societies around the world. And it's within this context today that we will dive into the theme of activism and its role in urban transitions. And activism has historically been a powerful force for societal transformation and continues to play a pivotal role in catalyzing change. Throughout the next hour now, we will delve into the impact of activism in shaping our cities and discuss how it can contribute to urban transitions. And today we have a panel with us with distinguished experts in the field of urban planning and research who will share their valuable insights and experiences around this topic. Maija Faehnle, Joshua Grigsby, Gunnar, Grandel, and Niemand, very welcome, and thank you for being here today. And to kick off our conversation, I would like to start with you, Maija. You are a senior research scientist at the Finnish Environment Institute and have done research on civic activism and voiced the term fourth sector activism. Could you tell us a little more about what this term means and what you found in your research?
Yes, thanks, Jennifer. Really nice to join this webinar. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really fascinated about discussing our idea of fourth sector activism in this international context that we have done research in Helsinki metropolitan area and a bit wider, but here in this Nordic strong public sector context. And here the tradition is like the cities have really a strong role, and it has not been so usual that citizens get really active and kind of take the role of planners or developers. And now in this digital age, it has become more easy when you can just establish a social media group and start acting, and you don't really need a kind of NGO or kind of hierarchical organization to get something organized, but you can start it really easily by yourself. So a couple of years ago, with my colleague Pasi Mäenpää from the University of Helsinki, we conducted our research on urban civic activism, and we found this concept of the fourth sector really useful here to describe this current phenomena that much of the civic action doesn't happen in a traditional way in NGOs or this organized third sector, but it's kind of fourth sector, informal, network-based, like kind of do-it-yourself action, that kind of really informal and rapid and even pop-up style action. And people can organize different things like set up a movement and organize events really fast, or they can prepare alternative city plans instead of just participating, or they can organize alternative food networks and kind of create new services and things like that, and affect the local development in very new and effective ways. So that's my background, especially to this topic.
Thank you, Maija, for that introduction. Here with us today, we also have Hanna Niemand. You are an architect and part of Kollektiv Raumstation, and you also define yourself as an activist. What would you say being an activist mean to you? And could you describe a little bit what Kollektiv Raumstation does?
Well, well, I think these are two things. So as Kollektiv Raumstation, we I think we learn a lot from activism, and we're also thinking of maybe the same questions, the same aims, and trying to connect maybe the knowledge of planning, for example, and the aims of activists, and to bring things together to learn, but also to share our knowledge. And being an activist, well, I think this is not really easy, because it's hard to really change things and really to say, as an activist, I was part of changing things, because change is really slowly. And I think this is one of our points, that change is always happening when a lot of different players play together, or collaborate maybe also.
And also, I mean, as maybe I can also say hi, nice to be part of the panel today. So as Kollektiv Raumstation, we do interventions in public space, we do exhibitions and walks and workshops and so on. And I think we somehow hesitate calling ourselves activists, with respect for those who, for example, are involved in civic disobedience and facing repressions for that. And I think what we do is a lot of easier and maybe also more fun job in a way. And so it's maybe we don't see ourselves in this way as classical activists. But also Hanna is more involved in this style of activism as well.
Thank you, and having you on the mic, Gunnar. You're also a researcher at TU Vienna. It would also be interesting to hear a little from your experience with being a researcher and also engaging in different types of activism.
Yes, I also work at TU Wien at the research unit for transportation system planning, and there we deal with transformation processes when it comes to the mobility transition, and we accompany municipalities in their projects and set up structures for learning and for exchange. And I think in this regard, also a lot of my background in the work with the Raumstation helps me in setting up this kind of also different ways of coming together and talking with each other and sharing. But also, it's super interesting to combine the perspective of sometimes standing outside of these, or feeling like you stand outside of transition processes, demanding something or working on getting something into going. And on the other hand, now also seeing what's happening inside the municipality administrations. And I think it's a nice way of building bridges between these two different approaches to driving urban transitions in a way.
Thank you, Gunnar. Now I also see that we have Joshua with us. Thank you for joining us. If we continue a little bit on the dissection of the term activism, according to you, Joshua, what does activism entail, and why do you think activism is important to drive urban transitions?
Well, first, welcome. Yes. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here and have this conversation and hear the viewpoints of the panelists and see what questions arise from people listening. I liked that the title of this session was focused more on activism and activist. I mean, I think some of the comments already about a bit of a hesitation of a label like that, to say I am an activist is a bit like saying, I don't know, I'm a cyclist and therefore I can never drive a car. I think one engages in activism, and not all of the time and not in every situation, but if you see it as not a label but rather a behavior or an act, then I think it's something that opens itself up to everybody. You don't have to consider yourself an activist to engage in activism. I think it becomes a much more open field. For me, activism in general it's some form of ideally constructive, productive dissent in a way, but it's calling attention to some kind of a failing in the status quo. It's saying that the way things are, for whatever reason, isn't good enough, needs to be considered more deeply, should include other people, whatever. There's some kind of a failing, and I'm going to maybe step outside the box a little bit and call attention to that. And to me, that's where activism begins, is the sort of the announcement of something's not quite right, and a bit of a call to arms to say, hey, I'm standing up and pointing this out, and I want other people to stand up with me. Let's acknowledge this and deal with this. Yeah, I guess that's where I would consider activism to sort of begin.
Thank you, Joshua. And I forgot here also to introduce you with some background to let you know who.
Yes, I was having some technical difficulties getting logged in.
Yes, but Joshua, you are a researcher at the University of Vienna and also a co-director at Smarter Than CAR. What would you say, what type of activism goes on within that organization, Smarter Than CAR?
Well, I mean, Smarter Than CAR began actually in China. It was China's sort of cycling advocacy NGO within urban areas in China that were maybe not for the better. In particular, China had a long history of cycling as a sort of dominant form of individual transport, and as it was adopting the car, it was essentially destroying the infrastructure that made that possible, and in the process having a big impact on neighborhoods and all kinds of things. So kind of from the beginning, our idea of Smarter Than CAR was cities should be smarter than car. It's trying to look at the way that systems work and the way that the pieces kind of come together. The car as a piece of technology is a pretty impressive thing. Doesn't mean that it's an appropriate form of technology to base urban mobility around. So the question is always sort of context. So we engage in a lot of sort of systems thinking and trying to sort of, we take the starting point that everything is interconnected. And the question is sort of how, and if we're trying to change one thing, why, and what are the impacts of any proposed change to all this other stuff? So if we say, urban mobility should move away from the car into other, let's say, active or sustainable modes, what impact does that have on other things? So this was the kind of the beginning of all of it. And we do walks, workshops, bike rides, sort of modes of discovery. We try and call attention to the everyday things that shape our cities that we often take for granted. we do research projects, we do exhibitions, we do a kind of a whole range of things, but it all again goes back to this role of activism as call attention to something and invite people in to engage in discourse and see where you can go from there.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to all of you for these introductions. Before we go further into some discussion questions, I would like to hear from you in the audience. And panelists, you can also answer to this, of course. Do you consider yourself an activist? See if we can get up the polls here. Yeah, I saw that you panelists couldn't answer, but I'm sure we all know why you are joining us today. But yeah, we have most of you answering sometimes. We have a few saying always, and I would say the equal amount never, but a large majority sometimes. And luckily, we have nothing of what is an activist, so I think that's promising. Yeah, but being an activist can encompass many things, and there is no single definition. But one common thread, I think, is about creating change. And back to you, Joshua, you said earlier that those who practice activism, if they had the power to change things themselves, they would not need to practice activism. And in this regard, there has to be some kind of coalition building or collaboration between actors to make this change happen. So how do you think researchers, urban planners, and other stakeholders can work together with activists more effectively to address these complex challenges?
Well, I would just start to offer just a clarification that I don't think it's merely a question of power or agency. That the only reason one needs to be an activist is because one doesn't have the power to enact the change. I think it's also a recognition that the power to enact changes that affect many other people, that reshape a society, are probably not good for one to activate that kind of power oneself, even if one has it. So I think it's also a mindset of changes that are going to affect a society should be taken by a society informed of those challenges, informed of opportunities to make changes. I think there's a kind of basic democratic kind of principle built into it. But I mean, I think the way that these sort of different fields can work together, I think it's recognizing that they're all adding a piece to this larger puzzle. I mean, you can take, let's say, politicians, planners, technical officials, commercial organizations. I mean, every one of these is engaging in a different aspect of a larger system. So trying to have these conversations where the voices from these different sectors or different parts of the system can hear each other and express their concerns and express their desires. I think this is sort of an essential part of it. I mean, for me, for the science and sort of research side, I think it's trying to look at finding the ways. I mean, in some ways, it really just comes down to obstacles and ways of overcoming them. That the research can really, why are these, say, systems that are problematic, why are they not changing? When maybe what opportunities for activism are not occurring? Why is this space not being opened up for it? When the space does open up, why do acts of activism not work? So it's, you're trying to understand the problem and why it persists, and then trying to look at, okay, if we understand what the problem is, does that also help us identify ways of overcoming it? So, I mean, again, with a lot of work in system science is trying to not only understand how the system works, but if you're going to try and change it, what are the ways of interacting with that system that are likely to produce the changes you're hoping to, to bring about, and how to do that, how to create the biggest amount of change in the direction you're hoping for with the smallest amount of input. So, I mean, it's, there's knowledge production, the knowledge gets shared, the people with the hands on the levers of power, I think need to be better informed. But then it's not just about being a technocrat. It's also about understanding people's concerns and the way that things actually affect their daily lives. So it's, input has to come from all these different fields for informed decision making to really happen.
Yeah, thank you. On this topic, I also have a quote here from one of our other speakers that I'm going to read out, and it goes like this. The public sector needs to recognize and acknowledge different types of activism as a resource in urban transitions, specifically activism focusing on hands-on doing rather than seeking political influence deserves more attention. Besides inviting people to participate in government-led processes, cities need to seek ways to support and join activist-driven initiatives. And this quote is from you, Maija. Could you expand on this and share your thoughts on how civic activism can be a resource for cities and how cities can support activist-driven initiatives?
Yes, perhaps this can be understood with the help of an example. For example, when in France they have had this kind of initiative where people organize buying food from local producers, and somebody in Finland found this nice idea from France and brought it to Finland and started organizing this show, or we have this RECO kind of groups. That system works with just Facebook groups where the local food producers announce what they would like to sell, and then people mark their kind of orders there and what would they like to buy from the local producers. And then there's every second week or something, there's a delivery event where the producers come to a certain place and people can get their groceries there. So that kind of new system that has been expanded, seems there are really lots of those groups in Finland, both in cities and in the countryside. And this kind of new, kind of transforming the whole food buying business in Finland, that people are kind of not buying food from grocery stores, but buying it directly from the producers. It's kind of new way of the society to act. And if these kind of examples are also in other sectors, then that's kind of transformative power that just works from the bottom up instead of the cities taking anything. But the cities need to see that this is happening, and some of these RECO groups have faced some challenges when they are just wanting to use certain place for that delivery and event for 2 hours for every second week. And that kind of needs, the city just doesn't know that this kind of needs can be there, because they have been used to rent those places for kind of local sellers who are there every day from 8 to 5 or something. And there hasn't been this kind of need to use something for some hours for every second week. So there have been some negotiations. How should we give space for this kind of activist groups? And all these kind of examples also from other sectors, that the cities have not been used to this kind of new kind of transformative resources that can be there in the civil society. And also the other example from alternative planning, that people are not only preparing city plans by themselves, but they are also inviting fellow citizens to participate. And then they come with this suggestion that we have a plan and we have views from citizens here as well. And cities are kind of in a new position to think that how could we use that? And then they face the problem like we have to treat every opinion in the same way, and we have to take care of equity in the sense. And it's kind of, it's the same word that someone has an opinion and some group has invited lots of people to make a plan. It's really different things, but the tradition is to keep every opinion in the same value in a way. So there are new challenges for the cities to discuss. And so we have been discussing our project that cities there are lots of resources that could be activated and can be used, but if everything is treated like we can't support you because then we don't have resources to support everyone. And if you reply in this way to all those groups, then nothing can proceed. And there are some people who were wanting to organize a nice event and asking the city to provide some electricity so that they can play their music and things like that. And then the city is like, oh, we can't give you electricity because then we would need to give the electricity to all, and we can't do that. So it's kind of ongoing, also perhaps cultural change to see that if we had some criteria for supporting some initiatives, then perhaps we could open some opportunities for local development. And it's never equal it doesn't kind of flower in different areas in the same way. It's always unique and context specific, and you can't really kind of anticipate what will happen and how people get activated and interested in something in some area. But you can't forecast what happens, and you just have to apply an kind of experiential approach and test what works where and develop ways to deal with these different activisms.
Thank you. Let's open up this question to all of you on the theme of collaboration, and maybe Gunnar or Hanna, you have done some collaborations with municipalities with Kollektiv Raumstation, right?
But maybe before we go into this, I would like to, I totally agree with what was said on the panel already, but I think we shouldn't forget that I don't know who of you put it as the transformative potential is not just in the, let's say, small scale initiatives that build niches and test things or generate new possible pathways, but it's also super important that we have these more big social movements who assemble different people under common demands and set a framework and push for political change, because that also opens up space for the progressive forces within municipalities, within the political systems that also work every day on changing something, but have set clear borders and need some external push as well to get things going. So I think also because in the chat someone asked about different roles of different kinds of activism or different roles. I think there are many different ways that are not mutually exclusive, or one or the other is better or the prioritized way of doing activism. I mean, that already sounds quite ridiculous, but maybe some of them, it is really good to find also direct forms of networks and formalized cooperation. Others may just support each other without even getting in contact with each other, but create a, I don't know, ecosystem in which change becomes possible. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, actually, I really liked the Hong Kong movement in 2019 and 20, and they spoke a lot about climbing a mountain, and that there's one goal to climb the mountain, and that there are a lot of ways, and that we should work somehow together. And yeah, that really inspired me by looking to the more radical things, but also to political change that, in my opinion, is way too slow. But yeah.
Yeah. These are some really interesting perspective, and yet again we come into this activism is a lot of things. It's about maybe creating a very specific change in one spot towards these global transformative changes as well. But activism can often face resistance, or sometimes from established power structures. And especially recently, there's been signs of increasing resistance towards climate activists, and environmental groups are, for example, reporting increases in criminal charges. And in connection to this, in your experience, what are the primary obstacles that an activist might face, and how might these challenges just be addressed in an effective way?
It's a tough question because, as we said, there's a broad spectrum of activism, and I guess the obstacles for a small-scale initiative that's working on, I don't know, traffic calming in front of the school of their kids, who try to reach out to the district mayor and, I don't know, connects with the cycling lobby, as very different obstacles than, let's say, a group like I don't know, system change, not climate change, who try to address the national level to change frameworks, but are also active in an urban environment, blocking roads. So I think there is no easy answer to that on this general level. I'm not sure if maybe one of the others of the panelists have something more specific or prepared to say about this.
Well, I mean, if we're, I think one of the challenges is using a term, a broad term that includes so many, that covers such a broad spectrum. I mean, exactly as you're just saying, that activism at a very small scale or at a very large scale are very different things. Activism to, let's say, to try and make something a little bit safer is probably an entirely different thing than trying to block the interests of, I don't know, the military complex. So, I mean, a lot of it has to do with what are the specific risks. You know, how does the power of resistance manifest? Is the power of sort of the resistance to activism, we'll call it regime resistance, the resilience of the status quo, if that manifests by simply having traffic laws enforced by giving out a ticket, that's a very different kind of manifestation of power than a truck driver deciding he's not going to stop for people who have glued their hands to the street and he's going to run them over. So, I mean, entirely different kinds of risks. I mean, I think it's important to expand what we think of when we think of activism, just as, I know this is a strange analogy, but if we talk about weather, right, we never just say weather, we're always then specifying, well, what kind of weather? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it sunny? Is it storming? What's going on? And activism is one of those kinds of categories where when we say activism, we tend to think of a specific kind. And it's often the Greenpeace or Fridays for Future. It's big, visible sort of demonstrations. I think those are absolutely essential to bring attention to something. Generally speaking, those call attention to some aspect of the status quo that is not generally looked at critically. And it's saying, hey, world, we have to acknowledge there's a problem here. And we have to do something about it. But that's not where the process ends. And I mean, just sort of picking up with the comment from, let me see, Michael Edelstam, to be able to look, I mean, he acknowledges at one point in his life, he was engaged in that kind of activism, the kind you think of when you think of activism, which is predominantly, but not only, a youthful activity that fits where you are at a point in your life and a mindset you have and everything else. As you age, as you go through different stages of life, as you engage in different professional activities, as your network shifts, whatever, the role that suits you changes. And I think you should engage in the kind of activism that fits you. There's no point in trying to make yourself a certain kind of activist if it doesn't speak to you. and again, I mean, my feeling with activism in general is use every tool. You know, every tool at your disposal. It should be a menu that's 100 pages long of the different ways to engage in activism. So, I mean, standing up there and saying this is a problem, this has to stop, great. But now we also have to engage in conversations about then what. So, I mean, it needs to go. Yeah, it needs to go in a lot of different places.
Yeah, maybe we have a point about that, and I'm not sure about the activism that fits you, because like the political space we're acting in is changing a lot. So I think we should really think about what can work today. And like one thing we looked at is like the history of activism in Austria and the protest against nuclear power plants in the 80s, and they were really successful. And then we look to today, and for example, there was this initiative called Platz for Wien, a place for Vienna, and they made a big campaign for space, for greenery bikes, and so on and so on. And it was huge, and nothing changed. And the council, the mayor of Vienna, never talked to them. So nothing happened. So
yeah. So it was one of the biggest petitions in Vienna's post-war history, which is quite remarkable. And I felt we were visiting this exhibition about the protests in the 70s and 80s from the environmental movement. And so it seemed to be very different in a way that there were also extreme reactions in a way, maybe even more than today, but also somehow national media coverage was very easy to reach in a way. Politicians could be met for face-to-face meetings quite easily when you compare it to today's standards. And so it seems that in this case, Space for Vienna was just in a way ignored. So the respective city councillor and the mayor did not even answer properly in the petitions court, which they are formally obliged to. And this is super crazy because on a way, this was a very realpolitik campaign in line with all the strategic documents the city of Vienna has passed itself. And so I'm really a bit confused about this post-political state in a way where it is very easy, obviously, to ignore huge efforts by big parts of the civil society of a city. And of course, that also shows then a few years or just a year later, there was this big squatting of a highway construction site where a lot of usually not very, squatting affine groups joined in or at least sympathized with it because somehow they experienced how powerless the, let's say, nice and neat and official way of doing a petition was. And yeah, that's something that somehow bothers us, what role we can play when a lot of pathways we know that activists have gone historically are now not really proving successful anymore.
Yeah, I think we touched on a question here and answered at least a part of it. And I see that we have another question from the same person here. And yeah, we already see climate activism. There's an increasingly tough response from society towards this. Do you think we will see an increase in conflict between climate activists and the existing regime? How will that manifest and how tough might it become? Yeah, Joshua?
I'll just jump in just to say, again, using activism as a big or as a blanket term is, again, it depends on context, and activism as maybe a resistance movement, resistance to what? And if we're talking about this specifically in terms of the sustainability crisis, we're getting into we're getting into the need to actually transform civilization. A lot of the foundations of sort of global thermo-industrial civilization need to be replaced. So it's going to a very deep level. I think the resistance is usually going, or in this case, let's say the tough responses are going to be equal to the extent of the change and the risk that it poses to those in power. So the more that the change you're calling for, the more sweeping that change is, the more fundamental, the more it challenges people's basic beliefs, the more it's challenging the ability for those in power to hold on to it. The more pushback there's going to be, certainly, and not just climate, but in all of the various issues of the kind of poly-crisis that's of civilization that we're facing. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine how this doesn't get more and more conflictual and more difficult. That may be a necessary part of it. To me, one of the things that we really need to do, and this is a role activism can have as well, is work on better problem framing. And it's kind of two parts to that. One is being able to more clearly say what the root problem is. I think a lot of arguments are had around the symptoms rather than the root causes. So to be able to be sort of better at getting away from 1,000 symptoms and down to 5 or 6 or whatever root causes that have to be resolved and have to be dealt with. And a second thing is to do that in a way that acknowledges the need for everybody to be involved. I think you can simultaneously oppose actions that somebody's taking and not oppose the people taking the action. To be able to say to them, the thing that you're doing cannot continue, but come with us, join, like, let's make these changes together. Just because you are doing this thing that cannot continue doesn't mean we are enemies. And this is where activism, I think, has to be able to separate itself or separate the act from the actor. We better all be in this together one way or another. So it's the act that has to be resolved. And I think in some ways, working with the actor, educating the actor, participating, empathizing with them, whatever. But it's man, if anybody has the answer to how these conflicts are going to play out and how to resolve them for the positive, please share in the chat.
But I mean, you are already touching on a topic that we already somehow talked about before, and I would be very interested also in Maija's experiences here. When we're talking about response, then, I mean, it's not just the, I don't know, national law and order response, but also there are very different actors involved who can respond to very different types of activism. And maybe you can also share a bit about, because you posed the statement that Jennifer read out before that goes in this direction. Maybe you have also some parts of answers.
Oh, it's much easier to have questions than answers. I really like the recent thoughts that you raised, and also Joshua's point about the root causes was really important. I think there's an ongoing forest conflict here in Helsinki, and it's just kind of the city is cutting forest, and the activists just don't like that, and they want to protect the nature, kind of really classical situation, but it has kind of raised attention to the ways these things are handled. And there's a discussion now that what should cities do with these kind of approaches when there has not been enough kind of problem solving attempts earlier, and then it always ends up in this kind of conflicts when the change is already happening there on site. And so there's discussion that the activists are really wanting to develop new ways to discuss these things and kind of, could we perhaps solve these problems in an earlier phase in a really kind of deep collaborative way, instead of just kind of narrow asking for comments that are not used then, which is more like the typical tradition. So perhaps some examples that where activists are really loud and get lots of attention, they can be used to raising discussion on the root causes then, and what could actually help. Could there be some opportunities to combining forces instead of just being in conflict? And I think this is really a deeply cultural issue. In many public institutions, it's the tradition that, like, we have the role to take care of this and it's our task, and it's not easy to kind of admit that there are others who could work to this as well, and actually we would need these others to do this better than we can do ourselves only.
Thank you for sharing that, Maija. And to continue on this theme more, also to expand it a little bit, has any of you observed a shift in the role of activists if we look at the past and now present, and what do you think they will be more of in the future?
I mean, we already shared a bit what we prepared for this question, that we felt it, there is more, let's say, yeah, how you put it, Joshua, resilience to efforts of activists. Yeah, I mean, when we think about the future, I mean, this is less a forecast than maybe a wish, or what we would maybe imagine, that also the because I will connect it to this observation that in the case of Space for Vienna, where we were also part of, the goals of the activists and the goals of the municipality are basically the same. So they are totally in line with each other. And it was so astonishing for me how it then still did not work out for also, let's say, maybe the progressive forces within the municipality to kind of play on it. And I would really like to think about how also municipalities can create opportunities for activists to use their energy, their capacities, their specific skills and networks and so on, that cannot be, I don't know, done by anyone else, to create something in relation to these similar goals, instead of them or making them wasted in endless friction about small details or the, I don't know, way of posing the question or whatever. Because I think we, or both sides and we all as a society, need this energy to speed up the transformation processes. I mean, this is a very vague answer without a clear, I don't know, recipe playbook, but maybe some of the other panelists or also the audience can contribute how we can make this happen, or where we see good examples for this. Maybe also thinking about civic public partnerships and so on, but also maybe more indirect ways of taking up the shift in discursive frameworks that activists can provide.
Would any of you other like to add something to what Gunnar said?
Well, I mean, just kind of continuing in the same thread in a sense that I've been amazed at how many conversations I've had with people, let's say private conversations with planners, politicians, with a lot of the people who are engaged in these kinds of, who are they're the gatekeepers, you know, they're the gatekeepers of the status quo in a way. And it's amazing how many private conversations have revealed across party lines, across whatever, almost everybody understands there's a need to change. They understand. I mean, I'm amazed at how well informed and how able people in so many different fields are able to identify yeah, this thing's a problem. This thing can't be maintained, but it's not within my box. If I do that, I'm putting myself at risk. I'm stepping on somebody's toes. I'm moving beyond the call of what, you know, what my job is supposed to be. With politicians, it's, yes, I understand all this needs to happen, but if I say that, we lose votes, or we indirectly support an argument by an opposing party. Everything becomes there's this kind of game that all these people who could very easily find themselves kind of on the same team, the team of let's not go down the worst roads into the future. Let's actually work together and create positive change and do the things we all know need to be done. So many people could find themselves on that team if they didn't already have a label of I'm part of this political party, or this is what my job allows me to say or do, or my company gets profits by doing this thing even if I don't agree with it, or I don't like anything about this, but I need to pay my rent, so I'm not going to speak up and risk losing my job. All these things kind of seem to get in the way, but behind those, I think there's a ton of will and a ton of support, and an amazing amount of like-mindedness about what the problems are and what needs to be done. I think somehow activism somehow has to point out the emperor has no clothes. It's these lines, these boxes are nonsense, and they're getting in the way. It's not really the people in the end. It's the boxes they find themselves stuck in.
Yes, if we zoom in a little bit more on the topic of inclusivity, like how could activists make sure that their efforts are inclusive? I mean, they're often speaking or acting in behalf of a marginalized group, but all people might not have an equal opportunity to participate in these such acts.
Well, not the direct answer to your question, but I thought it's maybe interesting to share a little bit our way to communicate or to work with people in our project as Kollektiv Raumstation. And there are like two key aspects for us. One is imaginaries, so the basic concepts of, for example, what is a city, or how should a street be used, and to create a new narrative about that. And the other, what I want to talk about more, is the question of how to not ask the people for their wishes, but to really talk about how they live, what is their everyday life, and then to develop a new view on, for example, space or streets. And actually, that's really, or it worked very well for us to bring, for example, in one street, their shop owners together with the people who just sitting there, or the younger people being there. And of course, we're not sure that we not sometimes overlook positions that are not seen, but we try to really reach like basic needs, for example, basic needs for mobility. And so I think we at least working on being inclusive in our way to, finding new ways and finding a collective way of looking to a specific street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it's obvious that not everyone can afford taking part and investing lots of hours in activism, which is quite clear, but still there are ways to reach out to people, to make opportunities and develop methodologies to make these unheard voices heard. And I think more often than not, these unheard voices can help to deconstruct a silent majority of the people need their cars to access the street because there are many who cannot afford it. And the elderly people are not helped if all the abled people use the parking lots in front of the shop. I don't know. There are a lot of, I don't know, I always come back to these very simple mobility examples, but I think examples like this exist in almost every field where it touches everyday lives. And also we as activists can profit a lot from developing methodologies to make more different ways of living an everyday life in cities heard, because it also, it helps us to make the right claims, but also to show that it's not just a, I don't know, bourgeois, green climate activism is for those who can afford it thing, but it's something that actually affects especially those marginalized in our societies.
Yeah, and to continue on this question, let me turn to either you, Joshua, and Maija, and I think this is the last question that we have the time to bring up from the chat. Please share some challenges that you may encounter when trying to be inclusive.
Well, I think activists can face same challenges as the cities when they try to be inclusive in their initiatives. Like there's one case where local activists show that the city has not been involving the local immigrant entrepreneurs in developing a mall. So the activists collaborated with 2 researchers, and they went and asked with a map-based questionnaire the views of the immigrant entrepreneurs and kind of made it visible the voices of the unheard group. So activists can show examples, and they managed to solve these different language barriers and accessibility barriers that the city was not able to do. So they can also help cities develop their practices, and the other way around, of course, too.
Yeah, we're running out a little bit of time, but just before we end, I would like to ask each one of you to just give me a short do and a don't when it comes to utilizing activism to drive sustainable urban transitions. Let's start with you, Joshua.
Do and a don't, quick one. I think a do is it's not enough to be against something. You have to be for it. So if you're saying we have to stop this thing, okay, then we need to change. We need to change this, but change it to what? What are the other options? So there needs to be, to bring people into it, there needs to be a productive element to it. There needs to be something constructive, not only sort of trying to obstruct something bad. So that's a do. And I think with the don't, it's try not to attack. Again, I guess I go back to don't try and attack a people. Don't try and generalize and put people into these groups of I'm for cyclists, so I'm against drivers. I'm for this, so I'm against. And to acknowledge that, like, I ride a bike and I ride public transport and I drive a car and I walk. I do all of these things. So, just as there are people doing some very awful things, those same people are human beings who care about their family and care about the future of their kids and grandkids. And so it's, again, I think the don't try and condemn a group, but rather keep the emphasis on the action and why it shouldn't be maintained.
Thank you. Gunnar and Hannah, just super short, one word, do and a don't.
A do is building alternatives. And also, for example, as a collective, in the question how we work, how we can try out to respond to, for example, upcoming crisis. I don't.
Do get organized, build up structures, not just complain about it, but try to build up for yourself and I mean, we do this as a collective, that we try to create a structure for ourselves that makes it possible for us to act. And it's something that supports us, not just, I mean, in doing projects, but also emotionally. And it's a group
Bringing
thing.
Gunnar food.
Not only this. But yeah, so I'd say, yeah, do get organized and don't get caught up in talking endlessly.
Okay, and finally over to you, Maija. A do and a don't.
It's good if you can be curious about what do the other people really think and what drives them and why are they doing what they are doing, and try to understand it deeply. I think that helps. So I very much support what you just said. Good comments.
Yeah, really interesting discussion, and thank you all for your time and participation today. Special thanks to our panelists. It's been very exciting to discuss with you and the importance of activism in urban transitions. Later on, you can find the recording of this Urban Lunch Talk on our YouTube channel. And to get invitations to future Urban Lunch Talks, you can sign up to our newsletter. And you will find all these links in the chat. And our latest news you find on our LinkedIn account. Thank you all for today, and take care.